All right, looks like I am now online. Let me check. Okay, good. It's quiet. I got the chat popped out. All right, let's see. Kahina Van Hell. Hey, how you doing, Kahina? Hella Aglia and Maya525 and David. How's everybody doing? Oh, so Waya, not Maya. I turned your W upside down into an M. Waya. So Waya contacted me. Let me see. Oh, here it is. Okay. So yeah, I don't know where Animist is, but while actually, you know what? Let me post the link in the chat, and hopefully you guys can use that link to join the chat. So try that and let me know. And when you come into the chat, mute your mic, just so you make sure that you don't have an echo in the background. Hopefully you'll have headphones, because if you have your speakers coming from your device, your mic will pick it up and we'll hear an echo. So make sure you have some sort of headphones, or something basically that won't pick up the sound of the speakers. So yeah, so a lot's going on in the world right now. I figured we'd chat about purity in practice. Now, this is not to say that there was a one pure practice and everyone should practice that. What it means is if you focus on a particular tradition, then you would want that tradition to be as close as possible to that tradition. So, for example, if you're using a practice that has something that comes from another tradition and it's not part of your practice, and oddly enough, maybe you just don't understand your practice enough, but your practice actually includes that same element that you're incorporating from another tradition, you actually have that in your practice. I don't know. I just find it funny because I see so many people making videos and talking about stuff that's I know the source of, and they, they're using it, but they don't exactly understand what it means. And I don't think there's really anything wrong or anything dangerous about that. It's just misleading for people who may be witnessing that and associating that particular tradition with someone else's tradition. So I just think it's an important thing to do. I also try to stay very close to understanding the history and tradition of where things come from, because if you understand where something comes from, you understand a larger element of that particular association and symbolism. I mean, everything, human beings are symbolic creatures. We're very visual. We understand things. That's why we have characters that represent letters for an alphabet, because we can understand that. Let me see who else has joined the fray. Hey, Animist, how's it going? Hey, Animist, and let's see who else. We have Dark Dragon 1988 and Synthetic Rebellion. Hey, Synthetic, how's it going? Good to see you here. How's it going, Animist? Can you hear me?
Uh-oh. Get my windows set up.
Oh, okay. Okay, no problem.
Do I have an echo, or are we okay?
No, you don't have. It's weird, Animist. I don't know what goes on, but sometimes, even in the Google Hangouts, because like when we were chatting last week, you were fine. There was no echo on your end, and then towards the end, an echo developed. So I don't know.
Yeah, it could be that comes from people somehow when they come and go from the Hangout. Maybe it picks up.
You know what? I think you might be right. I think so. Because that other person joined us. No, shoot, I can't remember who exactly it was. Huh?
Ani. Oh. Oh, I'm on. Yeah, we were talking with Ani last week. Annie?
Yeah, exactly. And as soon as they left, the echo was there. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it has something to do with that. And hello, Star Dancer 58. And hey, Stu, how's it going? I'm glad Stu could join us. Can anyone join it? Yes, Hella, anybody can join the Hangout. I'm not an elitist.
At least not if we're going to talk about purity.
Right, you're right, exactly. That's ironic, yes.
You might not want to come off as too purity.
Yes. Let's talk about purity in practice. Oh, but I'm not an elitist.
Because you got me here to be the hot button for the more chaotic improvisational side of things. I don't know if there's anyone out there who's real hardcore into their one system, they might have a lively discussion on their hands.
You're right. It's like your practice pretty much encompasses everything. So,
well, if you're dealing with nature, that's my rule. If you're dealing with nature or healing or something, you come up against that a lot because nature is chaotic, and so if you're going to work with, reality.
Well, there are universal elements. You can look at every culture, any kind of a spiritual, magical, religious setting, and you can see similarities. You can see there are elements that unify, even though the cultures are spread throughout the entire world. One of them is language, the magic of language. Language is always very important in every single religious, magical, spiritual practice.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So it's like everybody's got some kind of song magic or music magic that they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, language is very, very powerful, and regardless of whatever your practice is, language is associated with it. And it's not to get all biblical, but I mean, God breathed and then there was life. It's sort of the same thing. It's like once you kind of open your mouth and create a sound, you've created something. You've created a thought, which now can be passed along to somebody else or used to describe something or create something. So, language is the very first element of all creation, at least, symbolically in the human world.
Yeah, where I start to go over is when you go from general principles, guiding principles, and when you start getting into what I call systems, then you have to be careful that you don't get out of touch with reality changing around you. Maybe that's too obvious, but it's something that a lot of systems struggle with because they're trying to preserve their system. And the system itself is not an exact example of what to do all the time. There's going to be times you're going to do something different by your inspiration or whatever, by your intuition.
And who's trying to preserve it?
Well, systems in general, once somebody makes a system, whether it's karate or Wicca or being a Republican, any system of thought, it's very easy to get caught in a trap of, well, this works, so it must be right. And so therefore this is the right thing to do all the time. Which is how you get all those, we were talking about, all those denominations of religion, because each one came up with their own system that was appropriate to what they thought their environment was. And it was a little bit different than what someone else had previously thought was appropriate to their environment or their way of thinking. And so you get all these splits because people can't have a hard time accepting that there's no one solid truth that's always going to be very specifically applicable in the same way to every circumstance.
So let me put you on the spot here. Do you think there is a universal unity, meaning that there is a one like system, one practice? Hello, Waya, welcome.
Hey there. Well, if there was only one application, then you'd only need one system. But as long as there's more than one thing to do, or more than one thing to look at, or more than one time to do it in, you're going to have to evolve, whether both as a group and as an individual. I think most of the people who are the most worried about keeping their system pure or their lineage pure are people who are either lying about what they know or who don't really understand the purpose of their system or their style.
But the way you describe, well, you know what? Hold on one second. I want to welcome the people who just popped in.
Yeah,
but I want to get back to that, Animus. Hey, Morgan, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself, or?
Wow,
you don't
this
have
is really
to.
cool for me. No, I've just been watching your channel for a really long time.
Oh,
I mean, not really long time. Since I started on my path and everything, I've been watching you, and it's really cool.
Oh, wonderful! Good. I'm glad. Is there any particular videos that you like anyone that you find the most interesting?
I like your debunking videos.
Okay.
I talk with my friends a lot about them, and they are kind of tired of hearing me talk about it.
Great. So I'm making you the oddball at your workplace. Wonderful. Well, that's good. Well, good. I'm really glad, because I love, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this hangout, so that I can interact with people who I don't normally interact with, maybe on my you know, I don't have the chance to interact with in the comment section. So
yeah.
So cool. And is it Waya 525? Can you hear us? She has herself muted. Well, cool. So yeah, Animist. I completely lost track of what we were talking about. Oh, we were talking about purity of practice. You know, yeah, you make it sound a little bit like a negative, and I'm thinking I think it can be a negative. Like if you take the position that whatever you practice is the superior practice, or you think it's better than other practices. If you sort of get that mentality of superiority, then I think purity becomes dangerous, and it becomes disruptive, and it also becomes toxic. That's what I think. But if you can see parallel similarities between your practice and someone else's practice, then it's no longer that you think that your practice is better than theirs. More is it's you see parallels in the practice, and you can see how what they do is how you do. You know, so it's more of a way of relating than I think feeling superior.
Well, if you do it right, yeah.
Oh, sounds like Waya is having a little trouble with the sound, so I'm just going to mute you, Waya, while you get that worked out. But you know, don't stress. So,
I hope.
Whoop. Right when she got her mic fixed, I muted her. I'm so sorry, Waya. Oh man, I think it's on a timer. So sorry, Waya. Oh man. So
remember, everybody, you probably need to mute the window that you have, the YouTube window open with the chat, in order for it not to feedback loop through the Google Hangout. That's something we discovered early on. Yeah.
Well, this is wonderful. I have a new person joining my Hangout, and I mute them. They're like, man, this guy's a dick.
Well, the feedback loops develop so fast, you kind of have to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because she was, I could hear her kind of fumbling in the background with the mic, so I knew something was going on. But then I thought she was still working on the problem, and then she fixed it right when I muted her. Oh well. I don't treat everybody like this, Morgan. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Morgan. Is there a particular reason why you like my channel, or do you have a practice yourself, or?
Yes. So I don't even know how I happened upon your channel. To be quite honest, I don't remember. But I grew up. I am currently living in South Florida, and there's a heavy, heavy Catholic population, and my whole family's Christian, and then my future husband's family is Christian. And so I was stuck in this really weird situation where I kind of felt alone. And then a lot of the times, sometimes I get approached by random people. Like I'll have my tarot cards out or I'll be wearing something, and they're like, "Oh, what's wrong with you? Like, don't you know that's like the devil's stuff and you're going to go straight to hell?" And I was like, "Wow, this is awesome. Thank you for this lovely interaction today." And so that's kind of what drew me to the channel. It's just watching that, and it made me giggle, and that really helped a lot to get through it, because I was like, "Oh, they're just, BSing me and whatnot."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it's yeah, I know it's funny. I really
nigga.
Is there anything else? No, I guess that's all I wanted to say. I really amplify like the minority section who's the loudest, and the majority of people who label themselves Christian, they don't care. They're going through their day, they're doing what they're doing. Maybe they have their charity that they work with, whatever that might be. I know here in San Francisco, there's a lot of charity work that is done with homeless and sex education and AIDS advocacy and all kinds of various charities. None of them, absolutely none of them, have any problem if my pentagram happens to drop out of my shirt, or something like that. And it's really a small percentage of people. I think it's the people who have the weakest amount of foundation in their own faith who seem to be the most judgmental of other people's faith, if that makes any sense. Hey, he's back. What do you want to say this time?
Up the KKK revolution.
Okay, anything else? So how do people, is this something people do? They go in other people's hangouts and just randomly yell stuff?
Everybody was 14 years old once, I guess. I mean, I wasn't, but most people were.
But even at 14 years old, I had other stuff to do, rather than jump into people's hangouts and yell stuff.
People didn't have hangouts when we were 14.
Well, right, exactly. Well, I know, but still, even okay, let me put it this way. When I was 14, I had other stuff to do rather than try to, I don't know, get a giggle out of somebody.
Yeah, but back then also, if you wanted to troll a group of people, you actually had to be there in person with them, and there was a much higher risk factor with that. They might decide they didn't like your trolling.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I know, but actually, when I was a young kid, but I think it was before I was 14. When I was younger than that, there were things that I used to go and do, like we would do pranks in the neighborhood. And so we would do various things like ding dong ditch. If people know what that is, would you knock on somebody's door and run away? I don't know. It was stupid, but hey, when you're like 10 years old, 9 years old, it's funny as hell.
Right, that's basically what's happening here. He's playing ding dong ditch. Have to be somewhat tolerant of the children until you figure out how to lock them up. Well,
yeah. I mean, there was one other thing. There's these things called poppers. I don't know if they sell them anymore, but it was a little plastic thing that was filled with confetti, and it had a little tiny explosive that if you pulled the string on it, the explosive would pop and all the confetti would shoot out. and there's a little tiny, the little explosive is like a little tiny firecracker with a long string, almost looks like a very small, thin tampon, and with really long string. And you would take this, and you would tape one end to the door, and then you would tape the other end to the and
I think I had time to get the mute on him that time.
Oh man, he blocked us. Oh well. Anyhow, so yeah, so you take the other end to the string and you would tape it to the side of the door, so that when people, you would knock on the door and run away, and when they would open the door, it would pop and it would scare them. I don't know. Again, I mean, it's just something you do when you're a little kid. So, why? Can you talk now? I unmuted you, Waya, so you should be good. Okay. Well, Waya, let me know in the side chat here, or in the chat, if you're having a problem. So what a weird hangout today. But yeah, so I completely lost track of what we were talking about, Animus. Uh-oh, Animus muted himself.
I'm chewing pizza. I'm trying not to chew pizza at you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you not chewing pizza in our ear. So, yeah. So, I mean, the topic of purity in practice it's kind of a guideline topic. We don't really have to talk about that. But Morgan, what are your thoughts about that? Are you kind of an eclectic person? Do you pull from various things, or you just do tarot, or tell us a little bit?
I see myself as more of an eclectic practitioner, mainly because I myself have an ancestry of Black people and African people, but I've been adopted by a family of Anglo-Saxon and also Native Americans. And I'm growing up in South Florida, which is a very Hispanic population. There's a few Buddhist temples. So then there's a lot that I grew up around and a lot that I can pull from, since also my heritage is from Jamaica. So there's a lot of mysticism and mythology that I could pull from.
That's cool. Yeah, that's one of the great things about, well, one of the great things I like about America and being an American is that, especially, you can really be eclectic, because most of us are mutts. You know, most of us we have several heritage. We don't just have one heritage. So we usually have at least two heritage from our parents, you know. And it's just really interesting because you can pull from those cultures that you have ties to, and kind of create a really eclectic practice that still is sort of true to yourself and to who you are, because you're pulling from all these various cultures, and or you're actually really pulling from your own ancestral roots, which I think is really powerful. Do you know which part of Africa your family's from?
Yes, I just recently did a DNA test, and I'm from the West Coast. Very, I want to figure out what they call it. I think they call it like the Golden Coast, because that's where they thought all the gold would be. So then, whatever. But it's right at the west end of Africa in Nigeria, where they got a lot of slaves from, and that's more towards the 1700s, where you can see in my genes how the white side of my heritage came in around the 1700s during that era.
Yeah, that's pretty typical in America. That happens a lot. So you've got company, although you've got an awful lot of company that doesn't want to admit that's the fact. Right? There's an awful lot of people who want to say, I'm just white, I'm just Black, and they don't want to talk about their great-great-great-grandparents have a lot of ancestral anger issues as a result, both ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you call somebody white or black, you're not really calling them. I mean, you're calling them a color. It's one thing that I don't really understand. I mean, I just kind of go with the flow, but I really don't understand calling somebody black or white, because there's no white land and there's no black land. It's chances are, if you're black, that means that you are of African or Middle Eastern descent. You come from that region. And if you're quote unquote white, chances are you probably come from like a northern area, So it doesn't really tell much about a person if you just describe the color of their skin. It doesn't really say anything about them. But I mean, Africa, the reason why I asked that is because Africa is just so huge. It's like saying that where are you from? Oh, I'm from, North America. It's like, oh, okay. That's not very descriptive where your family comes from. But yeah. And then what about and so you also mentioned Jamaican heritage. Is that where your family also settled?
Yeah, that's where my family had settled, in Jamaica.
Yeah, because I don't know too much about African practices, but there's so many different practices in Africa. I don't know which. I think the ones on the West Coast is mostly the ones on the West Coast that came to Jamaica, and then there's one other place that I'm trying to think of right now.
Haiti.
Yeah, Haiti.
And also South America too. And,
yeah. Where a lot of the voodoo and Santeria practices came to. Yeah, definitely. Have you ever been to New Orleans?
No, I've never been.
Because in New Orleans, there's a huge population of voodoo Santeria practitioners. I mean, I'm sure there's other large pockets in America, but that's the one that I know of is in Louisiana. Not Louisiana, New Orleans. But now, do you focus your practice on a particular area, or do you just sort of kind of blend everything together?
At the moment, I seem to be more aligned with like green witchcraft and looking at Anne Morris stuff, because I really love her stuff and how direct she is with everything. And I also love Greek mythology. Like from the time I was a child, my mom would read it to me before I went to bed. And so I've always had a really good connection with that, and I really understood it. And I have looked into a lot of African practice and a little bit of the Yoruba tradition, but I haven't really connected with it, which is unfortunate. And sometimes it makes me a little bit sad, because that's where my ancestors are from and that's what they practiced. But it doesn't really resonate with me quite yet.
So it sounds like you've kind of researched your ancestry a little bit, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah, for me, I tried to research my ancestry to a certain degree, but at some point, that's it. It's kind of just, whoops, we lost Waya. It just kind of dropped off, and it was sort of, okay, that's the extent of my research, and I can't go back any further than that. Sometimes you just get to that point. Shoot. Waya had contacted me, and I was hoping that she could be in the Hangout. Did she ever get a hold of you, Animist?
Not that I know of directly, but they were just in the chat saying they had to reboot their computer and was
okay, good. Okay.
Looking for the link to be reposted. So when they get back, if they show back up again, they're back. Maybe you can read.
Okay, good.
You will pick up a 12-year-old.
Yeah, Waya, if you scroll up in the chat, you should see the link, and just click that one there, because I don't want to post it again, just in case I get some other person who wants to come in here and just rattle off a bunch of racist crap. Let me see. What do you find? Oh, here's a question. Dark Dragon 1988 says, what do you find most different between religions that let people come and go without threats like Wicca to mainstream religions threaten people with hellish fantasies? Fantasies? I think that trying to keep anybody in any particular thought is just it's fruitless. It's ridiculous. Because you're no longer a part of something. You're now forced into it, and there's a huge difference. That's why one of my very first rules when people ask me about like, well, how do you find your practice? It's like, find out who find out who you are as a person and find out what you believe. And with that, find other people who fit or who are close to your beliefs. And if one day your beliefs, sorry, I have a little scratchy throat. But if you later on change your mind and you start walking down another path, you know, there should be nothing wrong with that. That's part of your journey. Other people shouldn't be like, oh no, so-and-so is walking away from the faith. It's like, no, it's, you know, sometimes people change, people evolve. Maybe their practice grows in a different way or whatever. You know, you should come together in commonality, not have one commonality that everybody has to migrate to. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's you can't force people to believe something. People are going to believe whatever it is that they believe based on who they are, how they look at life. So I hope that answers your questions. What about you, Morgan? What are your thoughts on that?
About that, well, I love history, and I used to watch a lot of documentaries, and then I happened upon a lot of European documentaries about the Inquisition and the Catholic Church and everything they had done. And it's really sad to see a lot of cultures that slipped away because of a very singular mentality about everyone should believe this, and if you don't believe this, then you're wrong. And that has definitely carried over, but it's getting better, and that's a good thing. But I do believe that singular mentality in a faith or a religion is very dangerous, and it can turn into a cult. Like, there's a lot of cults that have gone off of one idea, like what was it called? Jamestown? No, gosh, it was in South America where they're at one preacher.
Oh, Jim Jones.
Yeah, Jonestown.
The Kool-Aid.
Yep. One idea, and everyone has to follow this, or you're wrong, and it can get very fanatical and dangerous.
You know, there was an occult bookstore off of Divisadero Street here in San Francisco that was right next to the Jonestown Temple here in San Francisco. Yeah, and I mean, it's really odd. Like, I have heard of people, you know, like getting like almost harassed by the church that they left. There was one video I was watching on a person who had left. Oh, shit, I can't remember the denomination, but they were very much like, you know, they were very upset with her and almost to the point of harassing her. I think she actually did end up filing a lawsuit against them, but they were really trying to get her to come back and calling her evil for leaving and all these horrible things. And I mean, this is a rare case, but it does happen, and I just couldn't understand that. Like, I've done video responses where people claim that somebody who left witchcraft was later, you know, harassed by witches and followed. It's like, no, bullshit. We don't do that, you know. It's really funny. It's like Christianity and some other faiths, they want people to come into their faith. Like, you know, they're openly trying to get people to come in. And most Wicca covens are like, you know, like, okay, you want to join us? Well, all right, well, maybe let's talk for a while, get to know each other, and then maybe you can join us. It's such a different culture, you know. It's like people say, oh, I'm no longer Wicca, I'm gonna go and do this, and other people are like, oh, okay, well, bye, have fun. It's like they don't care, you know.
There were a few cases on the East Coast among tradition witches or lineage witches where somebody left a coven and went and started their own lineage, or a coven split where they were pissy with each other or cast spells at each other for years. But that was kind of a notorious environment for that, which is where I got the popcorn thing from. Everyone else pops popcorn and watches it. That's the only example of that. And it was mostly years ago, and there's now so many lineages that, there's no room for that. But there was a brief period in like the 70s where there were certain people who had a real sense of possessiveness about British witchcraft in particular. And anyone who left the fold was not persecuted legally or physically, but socially.
But that sounds more like more of an ideological split rather than, because people hive off from other covens all the time. That's just like you reach excuse me, for example, in British traditional or English traditional Wicca is the better term for it. As people grow, they come second degree, third degree, and the coven can become quite large. And if you have, you can only fit so many people in a circle, and then those groups hive off and they go and create other groups. That's a common thing. But it sounds like what you're talking about, Animus, you're talking about like maybe somebody has an ideological split with a particular tradition and they start their own coven. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, this was back in the days when, BTW was a very tiny pool back then. You could count the number of major practitioners or covens in, the dozens, not the thousands. And a lot of them thought they were the only pagans in the world. And so they were sort of fighting over being the founding members of American paganism. And so there was a lot of politics, and there were people who, but this is 40 years ago. At this point, there have been so many other traditions that have sort of become public that I don't think that could happen again, because you can't try to claim paganism in America anymore. There's just too many of us that are too public and from too many different cultures. So I don't think that would happen today, but there was, especially, I'm talking about like New York City, in the days before Uncle, what's his name? Buckland, before Buckland even went solitary. There was a certain amount of infighting over who owned Wicca, so to speak. And so that's the only, but what I was saying was that's the only case where I've heard of that happening, was in the very foundational time of Wicca.
Well, it is interesting because a lot of the pagan practice, and I'm using pagan as a very general, wide term encompassing a lot of various people, back in the 60s pretty much came from England. So that's it, not necessarily directly came from England, but was influenced by what was going on in England, because there wasn't a very large open population of pagan reconstructionists, of various practices in America before the 60s, at least none that I'm really aware of. It seems like the 60s really birthed it. So I think, then you can have like people claiming that they, like their tradition is, the purest tradition of English traditional Wicca, which I think that people even today still do that, But we have people who are in various groups who, try to create some kind of a purity test of their tradition. And that does happen. When I'm talking about purity, I'm talking about like culture specific. So like, let's say if you have a practice that focuses on voodoo or the Yoruba practice, that's your culture. That's how you practice. That's what you use in your practice. You could use other elements from other cultures in your own, but you understand that that's sort of an inclusion, and other people who may practice the same tradition as you, but in a different area. What happened? Would not, like, if they saw your practice and they saw that other element being included in there, they would know that that is a later adaptation. It's not part of the original practice. That's what I meant by purity. Hey, Waya, how's it going? Can you hear us? Yep. Back and forth.
I have got the tablet from hell.
Okay.
I don't know if you can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Waya.
Thank God. Yeah, I've been listening to what you guys have got to say. Em Raybeck, by the way, is a friend of mine who's practically my sister. We've known each other about 20 years.
Sorry, just to let you know, we can't really see you.
Okay.
Because it's so dark. So, but just I just want to let
That's
you know.
fine.
Well, we can hear you.
I look like hell anyway, so it's that's fine. But there's an Em Raybeck on your top chat. She's a friend of mine. She is a witch, and we're practically sisters. I mean, she went with me through the cancer, and stuck by my side the entire time. She's an awesome person. So I invited her here. She wants to join the chat if possible.
Of course, absolutely. Yes, she's more than welcome.
Okay, because for some reason I couldn't scroll back up and get the link.
Okay.
So I had to cold reboot everything. I have the tablet from hell.
Okay. Oh, is this?
So
is this?
I had to,
go ahead, Waya.
she would be.
Go ahead.
She would. She's Em Raybeck on your side. This is new to me. I've never done this before.
That's okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. So if you want to join us, the chat. If you, I actually, you know what? I'm just going to post it again. I'll post the link in there. But when it starts getting filled up like this, what we'll have to do is mute ourselves while somebody else is talking, just so it doesn't echo back on us. So let's just keep that in mind. So okay. So if how do you say her name again? Is it Arime?
Em Raybeck.
Oh, Em Raybeck.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so if she wants to join us, I put the link in the chat again. So if she wants to join us, she's more than welcome to.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you, Willow.
I found the link up at the top, and I figured I'd join.
Okay. No, welcome.
Thank you.
Man.
The more the merrier.
Yes, exactly.
It irritates the two sticks.
So Waya, I know you contacted me via email, and you wanted to get a hold of Animist. So here's your opportunity. If you want to, well, maybe not exchange information with him via the live chat, but maybe you two can get together afterwards and exchange email addresses.
Oh, I'm not shy.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, you know what? There is a chat. Oh, actually, I don't know how it looks like on the tablet, but on my screen in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little blue comment icon, and in this, I can type something, and it will show up in our private chat. So Animus just put his email in there. Can you see that, Waya?
No, I can't actually.
You can't. Okay.
But since my email is pretty much public, it's WAYA5 @yahoo.com.
Okay.
I have the shortest email on record. Nobody can figure out why is it so short? Because I got it at the beginning of the internet.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. I know sometimes you'll see people with, like, Wendy O at AOL. It's like, wow, they've had that for a long time. Now it's like Wendy O 6543743-2 at gmail.com.
My email's back when they had hotmail.ca.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even have that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Things have changed.
Yeah, I have a brother who's address is at AOL.com. It's like, wow, he's had that for a long time. So we were talking about sort of loosely talking about purity of practice. And I know, Waya, you and I talked a little bit via email. And so what do you think about that? Is that something that is important to you in your practice, or you just kind of like, you just kind of throw everything in there?
You shouldn't mix disciplines on the same altar.
Okay.
Pure and simple. I happen to know somebody who did just that and mixed a very strong pagan with Native American spirituality on the same altar and made a huge mess. And I understand the people who had to fix it worked about 8 hours to fix it. So I don't recommend it. I really don't.
It depends on how good you are at what you do and how much you've practiced the systems that you're trying to blend.
Yeah, but I think they would get jealous of one another because believe it or not, the Orange County Society for Psychic Research had to step in. It turned into that kind of a mess. So I don't recommend it. I really don't. And a lot of the Native beliefs that I have encountered I grew up in the Native community. Believe it or not, in Fremont, right across the Dumbarton Bridge from where you are, Hellbound. And I can tell you from experience, I've run into a number of different disciplines. And no, you just don't. It gets interesting when you get a lot of mixed bloods who are mixed Lakota and, say, Ute. Or Navajo. I knew a woman who's Hopi and Cherokee. And basically what the elders see is you pick one or the other. You honor both, but you pick one or the other. It just makes a mess.
So are you talking about like from your practice, your perspective on an altar, if you had like, let's say a Hopi deity and maybe a Cherokee deity on that altar, that would not be good? Or are you talking about like having having a Hopi, a Hopi deity and like, let's say Thor on your altar?
Well, we don't have an altar per se.
Okay.
No, it's basically we face east and pray.
Okay, yeah. What I'm trying to figure out is you talked about like if you have mixed deities on your altar, or you mix things on your altar apparently from different cultures. So I'm just wondering where you draw the line on culture. You see, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I kind of can understand what you're saying. For example, most of our powwows that are out there are intertribal. They either will feature what they refer to as a Northern Plains drum or a Southern Plains drum. But you won't see them practicing anything in public that is of a deeply spiritual nature. A lot of that got closed off to the public starting in the late 70s. And unfortunately, it was because people started showing up at these gatherings and treating it like Disneyland. And you can't do that.
Okay. All right. So let me approach it from this way. You had mentioned something about having the Fremont psychic research.
Orange County.
Yeah, Orange County Psychic Research come in because of something that somebody had put on their altar.
Yeah.
So what exactly was on their altar that caused this?
Native American herbs and dragon's blood.
Okay. All right.
The guy did not know what he was doing.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you put dragon's blood and something else on your altar, I'm just trying to figure out exactly, because you had mentioned the story about something that had happened. Somebody mixed stuff on their altar, and something bad happened. I'm trying to figure out what exactly it was that they mixed that was so bad. Did they put like Kuan Yin with Thor? Is that what caused it, or was it something else?
In that kind of respect, I'm trying not to talk about too many details.
Well, that's okay.
Because
You can generalize, or if you can just generalize. I'm just trying to get an understanding of, was it the mix of deities, or was it a mix of practice, or what it was?
It was a mix of different disciplines, a mix of different practices. And that's something that is frowned on.
Okay. And were those mix of practices like extremely separate cultures, or were they similar cultures, like two different Indian traditions, Native American Indian traditions?
No, it was a mix between European pagan and Native American, and it just did not work.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It kind of depends on which culture specifically, because, like, for example, people from the circumpolar tradition can all work together all around the Arctic Circle.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also work just fine. I found that I can work just fine completely intuitively with the Sioux. But you could, with any of the Sioux tribes. I've known Lakota and Oglala, and we were completely copacetic together. But there may be other Native American tribes, and I always forget their name, but I wanted the ones that ended up getting called the Apache, who have some other things going on that are different than what the Sioux have or the circumpolar have going on. So if I was going to work with them, I would want to feel out where we were regarding the situation before I jumped right in. So it does kind of depend on, and a lot of it, sometimes it depends on the actual lands you come from. And whether your ancestors like each other or not, some ancestors are better than others.
Yeah, you want to be extremely careful.
Yeah, too, because if the spirits and such, like the European and natives had bad blood and such, and that, so the spirits could possibly see the Europeans conflicting.
You're gonna have to excuse me because I gotta block my camera because I really do not want people seeing me look this terrible.
Okay. Yeah, there should be a function on your tablet to mute the mic and also mute the video if you want. I don't know if I might be able to.
No, I got it.
No, I
did the old-fashioned throw a napkin on top of it.
There you go. That'll work.
That works. I'm terrified.
It also keeps out the Illuminati.
Oh boy, don't get me started on them. Oh dear God, do not get me started on them. We have enough trouble with people showing up at our sacred lands and they want to join in and they don't know what they're doing.
So, well, I don't want to know where you live, but are you like in Northern California?
I'm in SoCal. I was originally raised in the Bay Area.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because there's a lot of groups in the Bay Area. There's all kinds of various groups that practice around here, which is awesome because, you're so many different flavors of various traditions that one can explore. It's really easy to find groups, whereas other places in the United States, they just don't, there's just like maybe one occult bookstore and like a handful of other pagans, and that's about it, So I feel really, really fortunate to be here. But it seems like in my honest opinion, a lot of this is subjective. I think that what it is, again, this is all my perspective, but I think that how you approach your practice, like if you have a sense in the back of your mind that a particular deity is not going to be getting along with that deity, I think that that's where that particular problem can stem from. And then there's also, depending on how you perceive deity, you can have deities that basically would conflict. Like they represent, their circle of influence is completely, opposite or conflicting with that other deity that you may have on your altar. And this can go two ways. One, it can complement the other deity so that you begin to have more of a balance. Or it can be just completely, like matter and antimatter together, just like they just annihilate each other, and it just doesn't work out. That's been my experience. But for my experience, mixing pantheons is really subjective.
Well, one of the things I don't care for, and a lot of Native people don't care for, are people who are obviously looking and reaching for something that they're not finding in the Christian church. Mm-hmm. And back in the 80s, they made it our religion as something they wanted to explore. Well, a number of years ago, there was a sweat lodge ceremony that people paid for with a credit card. Mm-hmm. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And the thing about the sweat lodge is it is circular and it's covered with brush because the brush is a natural element and the heat can come out. And unfortunately, the people who paid with the MasterCard were dealing with somebody who thought it was fun to mess around and happily took their money. They covered the sweat lodge with sleeping bags, acrylic sleeping bags and blankets.
Now, they had a couple of
having been, you can basically, I've been in the sweat before, and it gets very easily 120 degrees in there. And with that much heat coming up through the acrylics, it tends to release a certain chemical that can literally kill you. And yes, there have been several deaths. And that's what I'd like to see avoided. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that
because people are searching desperately for something that they're not finding in the dominant culture's churches. Mm-hmm. And what they need to do is a lot more research before they suddenly show up doing, quote, a ceremony, unquote, because they don't realize how much danger they can get into. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of especially these shamanic practices are legitimately dangerous anyway. And so, buyer beware, I guess, but they weren't meant to be pop a happy pill kind of ceremonies. I've done Stone Lodge too, and God, I'm from Arctic stock, and so I'm not going to hang out in Stone Lodge as long as the Navajo can, And I knew that going in, So I was not expected to hold out as long as they were. We didn't try because I was, I'm delirious within minutes at that temperature.
I lasted one round, and I came out. And according to my elder, after she got done yelling at me because she was the one outside tending the fire and making sure there was water for people, she said, "You were totally inadequately prepared for this. You needed to prepare a lot more." I mean, she read me the riot act up one side, down the other, and proceeded to tell me, "You realize you could have been killed," and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I walked in a t-shirt and jeans, and that was way too many clothes. And I came out dripping. My face was totally red, and she just literally read me the riot act.
She should have been reading to your sponsor.
She was kind of the person, I loved her dearly. She has passed on, unfortunately. And she's the one who taught me a lot as far as the culture. Also, she taught me how to sing as well. And there are some songs I can do, and there's some that I cannot. And she was the kind of person that would really drive you up a tree. I mean, you could be sitting around in your living room watching TV, your feet up, you get a phone call, and she's on the other end of the line saying, "Get dressed, we have a protest to go to. We'll be there in 15 minutes." I loved her dearly, but man. I understand. I understand she scared the daylights out of Steven Seagal on the set of On Deadly Ground as well.
So it sounds like a lot of, I think a lot of, like, for lack of a better term, kind of new agey people. They sort of, it's almost like they want to kind of mimic some of these cultures so that they can sort of, absorb them. I think it's just the way that human beings act. We tend to sort of mimic other cultures and other people to become like a part of them. I find it to be, there's a certain level of incorporation when people do that. But I think some people take it a little too far, and they try to kind of like, they sort of skip things and kind of cut corners and try to sort of pay their way to have experiences that you just can't manufacture in a laboratory. And I think some people sort of approach some Native American traditions in that way. Like, they can just sort of, go to this sweat lodge, and somehow by doing this is going to somehow welcome them into this particular tribal practice. And it just doesn't work that way.
No. And the Europeans have beautiful traditions that they need to be following. I mean, they need to look within themselves instead of trying to grab somebody else.
Well, yeah, you could say that for everybody. I mean, I think that that's true for everybody, but yeah, definitely for Europeans, because I think in America, there's a lot of disconnect of culture, which is unfortunate. And I think I think that's something that just needs to be healed. But a lot of Europeans aren't allowed to heal yet. We still aren't at that stage. Hopefully, maybe soon we'll be at that stage where we can begin to heal, because once that happens, a lot of this sort of inner society. Anyhow, I'm not going to go on some tangent right there. But yeah, I agree with you.
I think that's legitimate. The first thing when I'm talking with people who are wanting to get into some kind of paganism, for the umbrella term, is I talk to them about their background, their ancestors, and their dreams. And it's funny because sometimes they will find some part of their ancestry that actually resonates with them. And it wasn't the part they expected. Like, I had one person who was kind of new agey, and I dealt with her over a period of time, and she thought of herself as kind of American with some and black, because since that's been such a big issue in the last couple of 100 years, it was a big deal to her. But as she worked with her practice, she found that she was drawn towards the Irish part of her background, and ended up sort of tracing back to doing things that were actually more Eastern European or North African, sort of indirectly. But it was by tracing back through something where she would have sympathetic ancestors. And I think that's an important thing for someone who's just sort of in the modern arena to do, is find the things that are going to be easy for you to mix with, where you might have ancestors or guides that are encouraging to you rather than jumping into the most alien thing you can find as a tourist. Mm-hmm. I found that experientially, I found that to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
You got it in one, animist. That's exactly what they should be doing, is looking to themselves and where they came from. And drawing the Christian church into a little bit. Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to talk about the two sticks. Forgive me. That is a term I use quite a bit.
That's great.
The ones who are Christian are not two sticks. It's the ones who set their belief system up in the closet and put it in away after Sunday service, and then don't pull it back out again until Sunday service again. Those I call two sticks, because it doesn't mean anything to them. So the persuasion of the two sticks is even kind of into my people. And as I told you in the last chat that we talked, animist, when we go back for national holiday, they're usually the first ones out there telling us how we're going to go to hell and blah, blah, blah. And they're walking in the parade and they're yelling at all of us. And they're usually the first people at the ceremonial grounds. So they have their feet in two canoes. And as my elder used to tell me, don't put your feet in two canoes because eventually your ass is going to go in the water.
Is that what two sticks means? 'Cause I'm not familiar with
I
that
call
term.
them two sticks because it's very easy for them to worship. Now, when you have an actual Christian who's actually following the beliefs of that way and the simplicity of that way and the nonviolence and the understanding, then that's a cross. But if it's somebody who just goes to church on Sunday and think their soul is taken care of and spend the rest of the week literally acting like Donald Trump, that's a two-stick. That's what I refer to as a two-stick, because then it's just two pieces of wood that they don't follow properly.
Oh, I see. Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay, so it's no longer has any depth to it. It's just a representation.
No.
Gotcha.
No,
I understand. I thought two sticks meant like two different traditions. That's what I thought. So
No.
thank you for clarifying that.
Oh, no problem. I just refer to them as persuasion of the two sticks.
Gotcha. I understand. So sorry, I just want to interrupt for 1 second because we had one person dropped out, which was Morgan. So sorry, Morgan.
No, I didn't drop out. I just changed accounts.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I was going to welcome
Hi,
in.
Morgan.
Okay. Now, how do you prefer to be addressed?
Yeah, you could call me Morgan still.
Oh, okay. All right. And then now this character or this icon right here, Helai. How do you pronounce that? Is it Hela?
Yeah. It's a Helai Aglaya.
Helai Aglaya. Oh, nice. What is that from?
Helai is Arabic for swan, and swans symbolize love and passion, art and music.
Mm-hmm.
And then Aglaya is Greek for likes to work with your hands.
Oh, wow. You got Arabic and Greek. You got Hermetic written all over you, or written all over that. Because Greek with Arabic, wow. That's a nice name.
It's Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because two sticks I thought was like two different traditions. But I see what you're saying. Yeah, I agree. I do find people who they sort of practice in name, which is interesting. Or maybe they don't. To call it a practice is something else. They call themselves something, but they're not really that. They don't really do it. It's just kind of like they wear it like a T-shirt, like, okay, I'm this today, and they kind of like go around expecting people to know what they are and to read that, but who they are and what they practice and what they actually do is something completely different.
It's when you walk your talk that really you've allowed what you believe in to define you. Mm-hmm. But you got to walk your talk.
Well, and
there's too many of them that just put it on the shelf after Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say, there's a lot of people who are basically tourists in their own religion and their own culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they meet the real thing, especially the real thing from somewhere else, they are in no way prepared to deal with that. Because now it's not only deeper than they are, it's also alien. And that can cause a lot of trouble for a person because it can break up their comfortable mindset multiple ways at once.
Mm-hmm.
Like I come from like a devout Christian family, particularly like Roman Catholic, because my history comes from the Acadians in the Maritimes, and basically like I'm the only witch in my entire family, but none of them like judge me for it. It's just like, oh, she's got her own path that she needs to walk and stuff.
Oh, that's good. So it sounds like your parents are accepting of your path.
Yeah,
Good.
and even my grandparents, like I've been an eclectic witch since I was 11 years old, and that was back in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
So that was back before a lot of these books existed and stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, like my first actual book was Ancient Egyptian Love Spells and Rituals that my Nan actually got me, and she also got me my Goddess Guidance Oracle cards. So she is basically in the occult section of this bookstore looking at these things, a devout Christian, and just picked them up.
Mm-hmm.
But like she also did, like they'd never call it witchcraft and that, but she had her own stuff. Like anytime there'd be a family reunion, she had this rosary and she'd put it on the clothesline so that it wouldn't rain, and literally it would never rain. So it's like the same thing. They never would call it witchcraft though, but
yes, and we never say that we can do anything about the weather. We always say we can't do anything about the weather. No one can do anything about the weather. Don't ask us. That's crazy. That's the official policy.
And how would you describe your practice if you have one, Willow?
Like I say, mine was it's always been like eclectic. Like I started off working with Lilith, so I kind of revere her like that mother that brought me into the craft, and then she brought me over to like the ancient Egyptians, and then over towards the Greeks, and my matron goddess is Hecate, and but also I've gone over to like the Norse and the Celtic and such like that. Like my patron god is Odin, but I'm a Libra, so it's just that it's like the act of saying to stay in one place is a lot very hard to do for a Libra.
And what is the book of the icon that it's open to? On your icon, there's a open book. What is the book? Do you know?
No, it's just a picture I found on Google.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
It's the book's in Russian. It's written in the Cyrillic alphabet. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's talking about mixing pantheons earlier, or mixing cultures, or mixing practices. I think that there is I think there's a fine line. I think that you really kind of have to follow your heart, follow your intuition. Like if you put two deities together, or two practices together that you don't feel it works, I don't think it's a good idea to continue with that. But if it does work for you, I don't see any reason why one shouldn't incorporate, various traditions or various cultures into their practice. But I think that once you do that, you really have to understand that you have now, you're not remaining true to each individual path. You're now creating an eclectic path, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that you need to recognize, people just need to recognize that, and not call it like, oh, well, this is how the Hopi Indians practice it. It's like, no, that's not. I mean, I don't know. I'm just assuming. I'm just using that as an example. But no, that's not how they practice. That's actually how you practice, and you're just sort of identifying with that, because this is actually how they practice. You just changed it, Yeah. And I think it's important for people to recognize that, recognize the history and where certain things come from, so that people can understand that, okay, well, this is borrowed from this, and we borrow this from that, and I think it's just important to understand, so people later on don't get too confused.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's something like being an eclectic is something, in my opinion, it's something that you should be very proud of, because it's absolute open-mindedness.
Mhm.
And like, it's why I have Odin as my patron is, of course, that strive and to wander for knowledge and such like that. And it's also lessons as well as that we make sacrifices, such as that Odin sacrificed his eye for knowledge. We can take that as, like, I take that as a metaphor that we make great sacrifices for things that we find important and such. But so I have that incorporated, but Hecate, as she is the goddess of the crossroads, basically it's though she holds the torch to make sure I always stay on the right path. So that's how I view my main two deities.
Well, it sounds like you've also done a lot of study and research so that you're best prepared to handle something like that. Where we have problems are people who just take and choose and cherry pick, and they're not learned. They don't do the research that's required in order to support something like you're doing. I have no problem with what you're doing. If it works for you, that's awesome. But it's when people are just doing it for fun or doing it casually. That's where you have a problem.
Yeah, because that's one thing I've always taught people and such, was that there's never ever shortcuts in the craft. It's something that you learn throughout your entire life and study and all that stuff. It's something that takes an immense amount of time.
Yeah, that's called walking your talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we
Walking.
lost.
Halai, I think.
Yeah. She dropped off again. So
walking your talk and making that your life's trail, so to speak, is the correct way to do things. I mean, if there's a spirituality that works for you, you live it, you breathe it. It's not something that you can just simply go to a church, do an hour or two, and then leave. It's something that stays with you continuously.
Yeah, it's a daily thing. Like, it's, you breathe it, you wake up to it.
I find it kind of interesting for myself. There's been two parallel paths that my studies have taken me. One is to kind of understand, to sort of grow in my own particular practice. But the other end, and I think the more important aspect of it, is how I've gotten to know myself and other people better, and how I feel more, I just kind of feel more in touch with things. And I think that's been a part of my practice, is to understand myself and understand the world around me better, as I have also grown in my practice of, like understanding where stuff comes from, and just, the mundane practice that, all of us witches do. And it's really been hard to kind of put a value on one over the other. But if I think I would have to put more of a value on learning more about myself and the world around me that way.
Yeah, that's what I refer to as looking at everything through the eyes of a witch, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of look at it as how the alchemical process. Because there were two of them. There was sort of the alchemical process that happens in the individual alchemist as they're working through all these various processes and elements, and then there's the actual physical part of, you know, breaking down vegetable matter to mineral matter, to, you know, breaking all these things down, which they had to do to learn alchemy because it's the basis of chemistry. So they had to mix various chemicals together. But there was those parallel practices. There was the turning lead into gold on a symbolic human aspect, and then there was also the actual process, chemical process of trying to turn lead into gold. So that's how I look at it.
It's also understanding your interconnectedness with your role in the universe. And I know that sounds really pompous, but it's not. Because you have to approach anything like Wicca, Native American spirituality, paganism, even Christianity. If you're following the proper path, you're contributing to the interconnectedness in the universe. When you're not, and you have this disconnect, and it's usually caused by greed. 9 times out of 10, it's usually caused by the pursuit of money. That's when you fall off your path. And that's where you land in the water.
So it looks like Haldel's laptop just died on her, or froze. So that's why she left.
It could be the same company that made my tablet.
Could be. Well, I mean, I mean, I'm glad, because I don't want people to feel like, you know, like they just get upset about something and just up and leave. Usually people say something when they leave, but, you know, obviously if your laptop crashes on you, then you don't have an opportunity to say, "Oh, thanks, bye."
This technology is new enough to be a little bit creaky. There's so many different kinds of software trying to talk to each other, and they're all in different versions. It's not really to be surprised at.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's awesome. I mean, because here I am in a hangout with 3 people from, you know, all around the world, and I think it's awesome. I mean, not really all around the world, because I think you're the only person who's out of the United States, Animist.
I'm from Canada.
Oh, okay. Okay, so yeah. All right, on this side of the planet, we're all on this side of the planet.
It's a North American conference tonight. Could I throw a couple things in?
No, you cannot throw anything in, Animist.
Okay, fine. I'll just go back.
Awesome.
Yes, please contribute, Animist.
Okay. I'll try to let everybody have their time, because people hear enough of me usually.
I understand.
But there's one general thing, and then one kind of culture-specific thing that I've been bubbling in my mind while you guys are talking. One is that if you're a practitioner, you're already the different one, and you would be even if you were in some homogenous native culture. You would still be kind of the weird one in the family, even if you didn't have to change religions to be a practitioner. You know what I mean? You're already the one who wasn't just the Sunday morning Christian or the tourist in your own religion. And so you kind of have to accept that, or it helps to accept that. Other people are not going to be measured according to your standard, and you can't measure yourself according to their standards, because, you know, you were sort of the one who was picked to have this fate. And so just realizing that, you know, some of these issues that people have as practitioners or witches or whatever with their families and stuff, that would be going on even if you were still in your little village 500 years ago, because, you know, you were the touched one, and you would be a little bit taboo, and also a little bit, you know, but fortunately you would have also been somewhat respected for, you know, your calling. And so people kind of miss out on the respect part, you know, in modern times, especially if they're coming out of one of these big religions. But, and I think a lot of the trouble that happens is when people don't realize which one they are. You know, the tourists try to act like they're a practitioner all of a sudden, and they're over their head. And or when practitioners feel like it takes away from what they are, that other people are being tourists. Because, even if we were in the totally traditional setting, you'd still be having that issue that they're tourists. And so you kind of have to leave them their buffer zone for how far they're capable of dealing with that. So, most of us here are pretty senior practitioners, but for new people, I think that gives them more trouble. For people who are less than 5 years in their craft, they're confused. Why does everybody treat me so weird? Like you would have been weird even back in the day.
Yeah.
So that's the general thing for especially newer practitioners. The other thing, because people are talking about their patron deity, and a lot of times one seems to be from one country and one's from another country. And something I've noticed over the years about Indo-European heroic pantheons in particular. So whether it's the Norse Odin Frigg pantheon, or the Morrigan and the other unpronounceable Celtic deities, I don't know, or the Egyptian pantheon, is once you start going into that general group of pantheons, they will pass you around a little bit in ways you didn't expect. You might have started by working with the Morrigan, and suddenly you've got somebody from Egypt, that's in your life. And it's because they all have a common root and they all have parallel structures. And so, like I said, especially for newer practitioners who are from a European witch base, don't be surprised that some place that looks like a different country on the modern map is calling to you, because it happens. It just does. They're very parallel structures, and it can go as far as like the Morrigan and Kali will pass the same practitioner back and forth sometimes, but they're all Indo-European heroic pantheons. And so, your local flavor may vary more than you think, and it's okay. And people who accept that don't have a problem with it.
Would you throw Northern Africa into the Indo-European mix? Because you mentioned Egypt.
Yes. Yes, I would actually, because they are.
Okay.
In modern times, thanks to a certain amount of genocide and conversion by the sword, most of Northern Africa is good Lord,
Greek,
Islamic,
Arabian. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot of Arabs, of course, and so that's their burden to bear, dealing with that environment. But the actual peoples of Northern Africa fall into two groups: either they're Indo-European or they're Berber shamanic. And that's the difference. And there aren't a lot of, for obvious reasons, not a lot of shamanic people running around. But then you also have the Sufis, who are like very similar to, they're ecstatic practitioners, and so they're kind of shamanic and kind of mystic. But most of North Africa is Indo-European.
Well, with all, I actually disagree there. I think that again, it's subjective. It is subjective. I'm going to repeat that, but I think that there are definitely in some Proto-Indo-European cultures, which is Celtic, Norse, Germanic, the ones that I've focused on, the ones that I'm very familiar with. I would say, yes, you can find roots. You can find roots with, like, let's say, Gwynedd, which is, I'm probably butchering his name, but he's an Irish blacksmithing god, and you can see similarities with Thonar in Gaelic, and then you can see similarities with Thor. So, yes, in that sense, you can see similarities. But once I get outside of that realm and I start maybe like getting into like Chinese or the Middle Eastern, or start going towards the south of Egypt, I think that those gods, I think that they developed from a completely different root. I mean, yes, you could probably trace all of the gods back to some sort of a universal, some ancient hunter gods, possibly, that we're just not aware of. But I think for the most part, those cultures, those egregores, if you will, have developed so much separately that I don't think you could really see. You could see similarities, but I think you'd really have to reach a deeper level to see those similarities. I think on the surface, there's enough similarities to not really find too much commonality, if that makes sense.
Well, if you go south of Egypt, you're absolutely right. That's a different culture and heritage stream. When I say North Africa because of the desert, I'm basically talking about people along the rim of the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
And I was speaking literally genetically Indo-European.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have people who are literally genetically Indo-European, and then you have people who are Berber, which is a different gene group, which is mixed through Indo-Europeans in Western Europe, and they're mostly nomadic herders. There's not very many of them. Nobody knows much of, nobody hears much about them unless they're overthrowing a dictator. But no, if you go south of Egypt, then you're into Ethiopia, and then you're into new territory. So I agree with you there. And then you better be ready to translate something. But like the Mediterranean rim on the south side of the Mediterranean is full of Indo-European people, some of whom were translated all the way from Lithuania during the migration period, the Vandals,
Mm-hmm.
But so, yeah, and that's the edge of it. If you get down south of the Sahara or south of Egypt, then you're into Central African cultures, and they have a whole different thing going on. And I would be more careful about trying to do a mix and match. And I've never heard of anyone being like led across that line personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen like bounce between Celtic and Egypt and Norse without any trouble at all, because those heroic pantheons have a lot of parallels.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it comes down to how you feel about it. If you feel that mixing pantheons works for you, then I don't see anything wrong with it. I think that if you feel like it doesn't work, like these deities just don't work out, then I suggest not mixing them together. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've heard about some people who have some really different, very interesting kind of, combining deities, and I kind of like look at it and I go, well, that there's no way that would work for me, but apparently it works for them. So whatever, more power to them. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, but they've got a different set of ancestors too. So
yeah, exactly. That's true.
For a lot of practitioners, not intellectual mystics, not like Buddhism, but for a lot of practitioners who are working from a culture base, like I said before, their actual ancestors make a difference in terms of having, from a shamanic standpoint, spirit guides or ancestral contacts from one region to another. And in America, of course, you got people who are descended from all over. It's just a matter of which strain is working for them and which strain introduces them to which one. Mm-hmm. And it's always very personalized.
Excuse me for just a minute, guys. I got to make a quick phone call. So I'm going to put my headset down for a minute.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's, there's just, I don't even know what to say anymore.
Well, I'll go on for a minute. You can think up the next section. Like one of the fun things we get in America or in North America is we got people, like I'm an example, who we've got ancestors and culture traditions coming from people who were trying to genocide each other during historical times. And so, some of my background don't really like each other very much, and and that takes some time to work out for yourself when you realize, okay, my great-great-great-grandfather over here and my great-great-grandfather over there were at each other's throats for 100 years or whatever, and you have to learn when to tell them all to shut the hell up and let you get on with your work. Because some of these little, the identity that you draw from your background can be pretty conflicted. North America's got a lot of that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I was looking in my background is like, if there's like possible connection with my ancestors and witchcraft. And I actually found the other day that as I said, I have Akkadian ancestry, and I found out that the Acadians, when they came to the Maritimes in Canada, was like right after the witch hunt in France ended. So it was like immediately after the witch hunts ended. And I found out that there's like 100 cases of witchcraft in Acadia. It was like 80 of them were females and 20 were males. But it was like suspected that like everyone from like your average person to like your elite were all practicing witchcraft. And it's literally just like 4 family names, like it's the Arseignon, Leblanc, Gallant, and Haché, which I have my main ancestry in that is Gallant, but I also do have Arseignon.
Well, be careful about giving your last name on a public YouTube.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so that leads me into another very interesting question. Now, do you believe that witchcraft is quote unquote in the blood, or do you think that I mean, having a connection like that with a quote unquote witchcraft family, do you feel that somehow gives you special, well, I don't want to say special, but do you feel there's something makes it easier for you, gives you a stronger connection to witchcraft than, like, let's say somebody who just has absolutely no quote unquote witch blood in them and just picks up a book and starts learning about it?
Yeah, and specifically in a way, but like back then, I guess the Acadians, like if we say in that the Acadians did practice witchcraft, and like that pretty much would have been like the iconic of what you could say is Christian witchcraft, because they're Roman Catholics, but they didn't follow the church too well, like in the witchcraft narratives, because all the colonies had to have a witchcraft narrative. And the Acadians removed the thou shalt not suffer a witch to live from the witchcraft narrative. And
what about the other 65 references to magic and witchcraft, divination, sorcery, etc. in the Bible? How did they resolve those?
I don't know for sure. I haven't read like the whole narrative, so I was just reading small part on it. But it was another reason that they were suspected of being witches was because the Acadians never had conflict with the natives in the area. And the reason for that was because the Acadians refused to adopt the cult of the Virgin Mary.
No, when you, because I'm not familiar with the Acadians, where are they from? A part of France?
Yeah, they're originally from France, but the place that was called Acadia is basically it's modern day Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island.
Oh, okay. So that's up in Canada.
Yeah, Maritime province.
I see. Okay. Now, okay. So those Acadians, those are the people who escaped from the witchcraft persecution going on in France at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
But yeah, they refused to convert to the cult of the Virgin Mary. They refused to do that and kept the worship of Saint Anne, and that was how they were able to connect with the natives because of the patronages that were associated with Saint Anne.
So where are you getting all this information? Was there a particular book that you read, or?
There's actually a website
Okay.
that I found.
That gave you all this information, the story about this.
Yeah, it's actually called Native Witchcraft Beliefs in Acadian, Maritime, and Newfoundland Folklore.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I kind of believe that everybody is a witch in a sense, but some people are just more in tune with it than others. I mean, I've met people in my life who I think would make absolutely incredible magicians and witches, but they're just completely unaware of it, and they just go through their life, but they don't realize that they're working magic in their everyday life, and they're causing stuff to happen for them. Some people are just, in my opinion, are just natural witches, and then some people, they have to work harder at it. It just really depends. Everybody's at a different level. So I don't personally myself, I don't know if somebody is more powerful because they come from, like, let's say, a witch background, or don't come from a witch background. I'm sort of on the fence about that, but I tend to believe that everybody just has that ability inside of them. Some people develop it, some people don't,
Just like any other talent, Mm-hmm. You roll the dice and see how much you get of which one, and hopefully you make good use of it.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, there's like people who just like have perfect pitch, and so they start playing a piano or whatever instrument, and they pick it up so much better, so much quicker than somebody else, because that person doesn't have pitch. Maybe they're just not musically inclined, but they can train themselves. They can classically train themselves to play an instrument and become very good at it. But they're never going to be as good as the person who just practices all the time. They have perfect pitch. They understand the musical notes. They're kind of almost like bred for it. So that's kind of how I think about it. So, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to look at, because I don't know if there's really any way that we can kind of quantify and, determine a measure, experiment, find out who has more, magical blood cells than the next person, or magical DNA.
Yeah, they can't even figure. Yeah, at this point, we don't even know the genetic basis for intelligence yet. It's too just even scholastic, and something like art and music is way too subtle for what we have right now in science.
Yeah. Well, definitely, I think the creative nature is definitely a part of it, because everybody I know who's I mean, there's a lot of creativity in the pagan community, I think, and I think that having a strong imagination and being able to visualize and be creative, I think, is definitely a strong trait with people who practice witchcraft and other various forms of paganism.
Yeah, of course, because modern witchcraft and modern paganism, it's a reconstruction of what was practiced back in the olden days.
Oh, I looked up the Acadians real quick and just skimmed it, and they were not who I first thought, because I was getting them confused with the Mesopotamian Acadians. But they were French settlers originally in Canada, and during the early colonial wars, like the 7 Years' War in the 1700s, a bunch of them were relocated to New Orleans in the South, and they became the origin of hoodoo. That's the same tradition.
Ah,
so that's that French witchcraft hoodoo, and it still is going on in the South today. But it was a bunch of people who were originally French Canadians, and they got displaced.
Yeah, that happened during. If you want to learn about that, it'd be the Great Expulsion of the Acadians. There's a bunch of them that were because of the conflict, France basically let the Maritimes go, particularly Acadia, and gave it to the British. And the British put all these Acadians on boats to send them down to the south, to Louisiana and such.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's a bunch of ships that crashed on the rocks in the storms, but all of the Acadians that didn't get put on the boats, they weren't put on because they went and they hid with the natives. And of course they were able to hide with the natives because they didn't have any conflict between the two.
Yeah, they actually were intermarrying a great deal with the Micmac.
Yeah.
Of
I
the
have,
First Nation.
Yeah, I am Métis with Micmac.
Yeah, so is my husband. My husband is also Acadian.
And if I remember the history right, without pouring through it, I think a lot of them were from Normandy originally, and so there were actually Norse who became French, who became Canadian, who became Cajun, and so wow,
right.
Traditions travel.
Yeah,
but the magic remains.
Yeah, very interesting.
When you start talking about blending culture magic, you kind of sometimes it takes a while to even unwind it, because what you think might be one culture or one region is actually maybe far more widespread and related to others than you ever imagined.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the farther back you go, it just gets so complex, and everything starts kind of, you can see how there's all kinds of parallels with things and how people have crossed together and cross-pollinated and settled here. I mean, it's amazing. And then whatever records they have left, the farther back you go, the less records are there. But I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, one of the things that amazes me is it's like each one of us here in this hangout right now are here, and we can actually trace our DNA back all the way back, because we are a branch of an evolutionary tree that survived. And as we look back, there are billions of branches that didn't make it. It's billions of them, billions and billions of branches that didn't make it. DNA just ended right there. That family line ended right there. And same thing with cultures. There's been cultures that have rose and fall, cultures that we'll probably never, ever, ever know about because they were just completely wiped out through war or pestilence or something. So I don't know. That always just fascinates me. I always feel so lucky to be one of those generations that did not die. Let me see.
And you're the sum of all your ancestors.
Exactly. That's a good way of putting it.
And they were all assholes to each other at one point or another, and we're descended from both.
Oh, you know what? We live in a day and age where we can go to the corner store and buy fucking meat. There was a day and age where you had to kill the other tribe because that other tribe is hunting your meat. And, yes, war, conflict, all of those things are horrible, horrible things. It's part of who human beings are. And yes, it's unfortunate, but we're kind of like a very, very privileged position here talking on the internet.
Oh yeah, definitely. I just noticed a lot of people, especially newer practitioners, they get really worried about, who their ancestral enemies are, or, ancestral enemy cultures or whatever. The clan feud continues. And then as you go on and you learn more, you go, oh, it's all me. Okay, I guess I'd better just get over it and get on with what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could focus on that. I mean, but it comes back down to, you create what you want, and if that's the kind of world that you want to live in, where everybody's looking at everybody judgmental because of, whatever particular symbol or element or color that they represent, I mean, yes, you can continue to live that way, or you can find commonality in each culture and each person. And yes, you're going to have conflicts with people, and that's just, you know, you can work out the conflicts. But, you know, I mean, yeah, wars do happen, even though if we want to create legislation or, you know, do whatever we can, wars are always going to happen. Little wars, terrorist groups, guerrilla groups, you know, it's going to happen. And nobody's immune from it. Nobody's pure and, you know, unaffected by that, because if you are, you're going to be the first culture that's going to be overthrown by the culture that's not as pure as you. And I mean pure as in, like, you know, good and trying to create some kind of a utopian civilization.
Yeah, that actually happened here on this continent when we first started having contact with the different branches of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
They could not understand why we would never go to war over our religious beliefs, because we never did. It's just, that's the way it was. We all had our responsibilities to the Creator, and it was simply accepted. It's not something that we would have gone to war over. Territory, seeking revenge for raids done by another tribe, that we would go to war over. But what our responsibilities are to the Creator, we never warred over that. And it's funny you mentioned utopia, because that's pretty much what Junipero Serra tried to do at the missions, was take people that already had a culture, a way of life, and their own religious ceremonies, and try to fit them into the Catholic Church. And if he didn't get his way, he would come up with interesting ways to force it. Not up to, but including public whippings, kidnapping the children so the parents would be forced to come and get them, but they were already baptized before the parents could come and get them. So the only way the parents could get them is to be baptized. And then once you were baptized, you could never leave the mission.
So Waya, what is the difference, in your opinion, between, like, let's say, a war over territory as opposed to a war over an idea or a belief system?
It's just something we never had. Red Jacket actually tried to tell missionaries back in the 1800s that it's not something we would ever consider going to war over, because it seemed no matter what we did, every tribe had a different responsibility.
Does that mean that there's going to be less death, or does that mean that there's going to be less bloodshed? I mean, what is the difference between a war of religion and a war of territory? I don't understand the difference between those two. I mean, I understand the basic impetus behind them, but I'm saying what the actual result is. I mean, chances are one culture is either going to be wiped out or pushed off to the side.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, does it really matter if it's over religion or territory?
Territory I can kind of see, because you need to have a number of acres of hunting land in order to be able to provide for your family and for your village. It just depends, because on the East Coast, Native people were more settled. So they didn't have to go, like the Plains people did, a nomadic existence of following the buffalo.
Okay. I guess all right. My question is, what's the difference? I mean, they're both war, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, it just seems like you made a distinction there, and it seems like the end result of what they're fighting over is the same. You know what I mean?
Correct, but we never went to war specifically for religious ideals.
Okay.
Oh,
that's good.
Everything else, yeah. Everything else, yeah. And actually, my tribe had a way of settling disputes with the minimum loss of life. They would do what they called a ball game, and they would pick their best players from each individual tribe to play, and it would get very bloody out there. And some people would, of course, get killed. but it was easier to have a ball game than to send all the warriors out to fight.
Right. So that was kind of like
It's
how
simple.
they. So that was kind of like their way of sort of rutting and finding who was the alpha male was sort of
Well,
that, but through sports.
it was more for settling. Yeah, it was more for settling disputes.
Okay, interesting.
Our ball game is actually similar, and is actually the father of lacrosse.
Yeah,
So
I was just gonna say it sounds a lot like lacrosse.
it's just bloodier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you don't want the women in it because the men have to use the ball sticks. Women can use any body part they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a relative who was in a ball game, and he lost most of his front teeth by getting his hands on the ball, and he basically got piled on by 3 women.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, they can use any body part they want. Usually it's a fist or a leg.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was a way of settling disputes without wiping each other's tribe from the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people would get killed, but it would be far less loss of life than an actual war would cause.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a duel rather than an actual war. And
Right.
both sides agreed to respect the outcome of the game, which is
right.
something that Europeans had trouble doing. They'd try to have some kind of representative combat, and then losers would go, screw it, we're going to go to war anyway.
Yeah. I know that's like a weird idea for most people in the dominant culture, because they just can't understand how we could settle something with a ball game. They just it blew their minds completely.
Now, did every tribe in North America do that, or is that just kind of like that one?
It was more or less the eastern tribes that did it.
Mm-hmm.
The western tribes, because they were nomadic and depended on following the buffalo and having as large of hunting ground as they could, because they would need the buffalo for winter stores.
Mm-hmm.
They could not settle in one place. They had to continuously be on the move. Hence, you had teepees and you had travois, which would have all of the basically all your belongings on it. So they were totally dependent for not just food, but for clothing, for armament, for armor.
Mm-hmm.
They desperately had to have it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think the dynamic in North America, when the Europeans came here or conquered here, it was very different, because in Europe everything was sort of structured like, okay, we had France, Germany, Austria, England. You had cleared borders, and all of it was very much borders and fighting borders and territories and very much like that. And I don't think that was the same case here in America. I don't think there was so much emphasis on, tribal boundaries to the point that they started building, like walls and castles and stuff like that. At least nothing that I'm familiar with. So it's really interesting when you get 2 cultures like that interact. It's like, you can definitely see how all the problems began to arise.
They couldn't figure us out because our women, a lot of the native tribes on the eastern side basically were matriarchal, matrilineal.
Mm-hmm.
So we had women on the council. We had women who even distinguished themselves in war. And for the Europeans, who are very patriarchal, very patrilineal, to see women coming in to discuss terms of agreement that were on a governmental level, they couldn't understand it. They called us a petticoat government.
But there's actually a lot of queens and such in Europe way before that. So I don't think it was all that unique. I mean, people still had to interact with queens. I'm sorry, you going to say something, Animist?
I was going to say the Iroquois Confederacy freaked the 18th century Europeans out a little bit, because they are literally matriarchal.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the men might be doing whatever they were doing. And then when grandmother shows up and says, shut up, time for me to talk. And everybody would just make way for grandma. It did confuse the European diplomats quite a bit. But the Iroquois,
Yeah. Well, okay. So what do you? Okay, that's all right.
The
What
Iroquois
do you?
were collectively powerful that it forced the Europeans to kind of respect that. So that, you know, in the early days, so they didn't
Right,
get pushed back into the ocean by the Iroquois.
Well, maybe I'm just not familiar. Is there something in particular that stands out that you're basing that on? Like some kind of a historical event? Because I'm trying to think of one.
I could quote you quotes.
Yeah. So it sounds like just kind of like a general opinion or general atmosphere.
It was the cultural atmosphere of the two groups coming together, because
see.
The Puritans were very daddy-driven, and the Iroquois were bigger, more powerful, and knew how to survive. There's echoes of this to this day in politics between the Iroquois tribes and the governments. Sometimes the government leaders, you know, the guys in the White House don't know exactly what they're supposed to be making a deal with over certain issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes they think they made a deal and they didn't, or they think they settled a grievance and they didn't. Mm-hmm. And somebody comes, what are you talking about? You're supposed to be talking
Hey,
about.
Waya, I'm sorry. I'm going to mute you while you play with whatever it is you're playing with.
I had to move the computer into the living room because my husband's trying to sleep.
Oh, okay.
So,
gotcha.
So I didn't want to. I apologize for that, but I had to basically unplug my computer, which has got an 8-hour battery in it.
Okay.
But, yeah, I have to.
It sounds like you're done now, huh? Yeah. It was just like, you know, it was like this kind of tapping on the mic. That's all.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right.
No, I'm seated in the living room now. I'm here.
Oh, okay, good.
But I've been listening.
I don't know. I just kind of. I mean, I'm just going to throw my cards out on the table. It sounds to me a little bit kind of like defending the culture, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with defending culture, but I think there's a certain level of honesty that we need to break down and begin to realize, and that is that every single culture has been pretty vicious. In sense that maybe they had to either defend themselves or maybe they just invaded another country, you know, or a war. And I think that we need to recognize that and understand that every culture does this. It's not just the Europeans. And I think that that's important to recognize. If there are ways of resolving conflict that don't involve war, I think that definitely those should be celebrated. And you know, I think maybe the Olympic Games were hopefully going to be something kind of like that, but we never managed to implement it. But for the most part, it comes down to somebody picks up a rock or a stick and attacks somebody else and takes whatever it is that they had.
The Mayan ball game was a good one to settle a war.
Yeah, in the Mayan game, the winners got sacrificed to the gods.
Yeah, I thought it was the losers that got sacrificed.
No, for the Maya, it was they would have these contests, and the winning team was actually the one that had the honor of having their will taken to heaven, so to speak.
Yikes!
Yeah, they had a version of basketball that involved like a court, like a sunken court, and there was a hole in the wall at each end, and your goal was to throw the ball through the hole in the wall, just like basketball, basically. But in that particular game, it was actually the winners who went to heaven by being sacrificed, and so their will was put before the gods as the better will. Which everyone else goes, "Wow, I bet those were some low-scoring games." But
really,
but yeah, the hole instead of horizontal is actually vertical, and you could only use your like forearms and your hips and such like that to hit the ball, and you had to get it through this little hole. But they actually used it to settle wars. That's how important it was, because it was a religious. It's actually involved in a story in the Popol Vuh, their holy text.
For what I can tell you from our perspective, good night, honey. Ours was a goal that was on the top of an extremely high post, say 20 or 30 feet in the air. And the idea was to hit that particular goal. And that was how you scored a point. So ours is a little bit different.
Yeah, but it's amazing how many sports amount to smack something with the round thing, basically. I think that's maybe as imaginative as groups of men can get. Take a round thing and smack something with it. We should go back all the way to the hammer stone, the original invention. We'll go all the way back to the beginning, and we'll settle it from there. And hopefully people will accept that.
I have this really unusual image in my head of this tribe of people who's basically grain for the winter is well gone. Pretty much all the meat that they have is pretty much not going to last through the winter. And then another tribe over from them having extra food and lots of meat and pretty healthy and doing pretty well. And them challenging each other to a ball game to figure out which one of them gets to survive the next winter. That would be a very interesting ball game, or excuse me, form of war.
Actually, what the other tribe that had the plenty would be expected to do is share what they had. Because
are we talking about reality here or utopian society?
No, we're actually talking about reality here. Before European contact.
Really?
Yeah, is that
yes.
Is that in the Iroquois Confederacy or a different region?
That would be towards the mound builders, but even the Iroquois, the Six Nations would actually help to support each other. For example, if you had a hunter,
so they didn't have war at all.
No, we had wars, of course.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
People would do dumb things.
Right.
I mean, stupidity is universal.
Oh, okay. All right.
And in the case of if you were in the village and there was somebody in another neighboring village that was freezing and starving, in many cases it would be considered a great honor for you to go over there and give your stuff. Because as somebody put it on a TV show a long time ago, the richest man is the one who has nothing. So you would be looked upon as privileged. Even in the Northwest Coast, everybody wonders about the potlatch. The potlatch is given by a host. People come to it. They get gifts. And the more gifts the host can give, the more he is respected.
So so it sounds like they had a culture of sharing and giving, and that's fantastic. That's great. But what about war? They just didn't have it. I'm trying to figure out. So because you mentioned people do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So stupid stuff and war. Okay, yeah, it's stupid to do war, but sometimes war happens and you don't have an option. But But they did have wars, correct?
Yes, usually it was caused.
They did kill one another. Okay.
Yeah, usually it was caused by an intrusion into another person's territory without permission.
Yeah.
Like if someone came into their hunting grounds without consent, and that would be a cause for war.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, I don't think anybody volunteers like, hey, do you guys want a war today? Sure, why not?
No.
They have a mutually agreed war. That's usually not how it happens.
There were some that did. The fox and the black hawk kind of did. They kind of had whenever we got enough stuff, we'll go on fight over small.
Yeah.
I grew up partly in fox and black hawk territory, and they treated war itself as something of a sport, and they were really hard on all the other tribes around them, because to them it was something to do, blow off steam on a Saturday night, go genocide a village somewhere. But there was a separation between war and aggression in a way. I mean, because there was some cultures, they have this sense of prestige. And prestige is better than victory in some cases. Kind of like the potlatch thing. You know, if you prestige is better than victory. Prestige means that you can respect the next thing. Plus, so some of those tribes were just really rich. You know, it's not like anybody was starving in the Pacific Northwest. So
No.
they had to come up with other ways to use their wealth to gain prestige.
Yeah, no, I was just no, I know. I was just trying to admit that they did war. I mean, it's just they did war.
Yeah, even
I mean, it's great if you can figure out alternatives, but sometimes you're just forced into a position where basically you have to defend yourself, and that's essentially a war. Or you decide to invade another place. But usually you probably invade for a reason.
Well, if you do really well, you've got too many people for the valley to support, so you start looking where the next valley is, and sometimes there's somebody already there. Mm-hmm. So, that's like a legitimate conflict of interest, but that doesn't keep you from having your sort of virtues and honors within your in other ways.
Mm-hmm. No, and we all, back then, all of us experienced the joy of raiding parties. Young men hot to prove themselves would go out and they would raid a village, or they would raid a hunting ground. Mm-hmm. That's how Sacagawea was captured from her people, the Shoshone, mm-hmm. and sold to a Frenchman. You have these people; they will attack, and they'll enslave. They'll do dumb stuff. They will enslave. They will take what's there, mm-hmm. and it gives them prestige. One of the greatest prestiges you could probably get would be counting coup. And counting coup is to touch a live enemy and manage to get out with your life. Mm. And it would be a dishonor for the enemy that you were touched by somebody that you didn't kill.
Mm-hmm. Right, or sneak into their camp at night and steal their blanket without getting caught, basically.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good trick.
Yeah, because it proved how stealthy and how in tune with, the ways of the nature and the ways of the warrior that you were. Mm-hmm. It was a symbolic victory. And they kind of diffused a certain amount of what would have been full-scale warfare by those little raids. And if it got out of hand, okay, then the grown-ups came in and had a real war. But as long as it was subtle and clever and a way for someone to prove themselves without causing a full-scale war, then it was a way to sort of release the tension, sort of blow steam off the testosterone.
Stealing the blankets. Friggin' Canadians did something like that to the Germans in World War II. Within the Devil's Brigade, they'd go to the German foxholes, and they would, the guy that would be awake, they'd cut his head off and write in German, "The worst is yet to come," so that the other guy that was sleeping, he'd wake up and find his friend decapitated.
Yeah, that really lowers the morale of the enemy. So when you showing them that you are vulnerable anytime I want.
Yeah, that was the Devil's Brigade.
Or with our people, if, for example, you went into an enemy's camp and you cut off his braid and paraded around with it, because hair was considered a sign of your masculinity back then. And for you to lose your braid and then to have an enemy waving it around in the air from across, you're going to get pretty mad.
Yeah, really, exactly. Yeah. All right, well, we actually, I started this around 6:30, and I was going to end it around 8:30, but we went a little over, but it was fun. It was fun to chat and find out more, and it was really nice to get to finally meet you, Waya.
Thank you.
Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
Waya is correct.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good. And hopefully you and Animus were able to exchange emails, and you
No, because I actually can't see that corner of the screen. I have got the tablet from hell,
Oh, okay. Because Animus had posted his email in the chat, but I think Animus earlier she said what her email address was. Did you catch it? Is he still there? Or he's muted.
I just stuck mine in the general chat. If you want to send me an email or something like that.
Okay, but I don't know if Waya has access to the chat.
It'll be in the YouTube chat.
Okay.
Okay.
If it's readable in the saved version that he posts, I think you put the chat in your saved versions now, don't you?
Like I said, I'm basically an idiot when it comes to this. I'm basically an idiot.
Well,
when we go off the live screen, it usually becomes a regular YouTube video, and I think the chat will show. I'm not sure if Loken does that or not.
Yeah, I mean, if Animus doesn't mind, I'll just go ahead and I'll respond to your email, Waya, and I'll put his email address in there. I just didn't want to do it earlier just because I didn't know if it was okay with Animus.
Oh yeah, that's fine. You know,
okay.
I get 20 spams a day from random companies. I'm not afraid to get an email.
Okay. So I'll send it to you, Waya. I just want to check with him first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm old school that way. I always check with other people before I give their information out, you know.
Yeah, for me, being what I am, you know, I'm a middle-aged shaman who's already weirder than you. I'm not worried about collecting stalkers, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of like at this point you sort of welcome them. It's like, okay, come on, let's go.
What's going to happen? Somebody going to send me an advertisement? Nobody.
I don't sell email addresses. I promise you that. I don't sell email addresses, and I don't send spam. If you want, if you want to forward the email I sent you, Heathen, you can go right ahead.
Okay, all right, I'll do that too. So the two of you can connect up.
Yeah, and at least Animus will crack up while he's reading it.
I didn't catch it, but you can send me an email. That's fine.
All right, sounds good.
I think I got 30 emails from a pharmacy last month, so you know.
Oh, good Lord!
I am happy.
Well, if you ever want to get Viagra, you know where to get it.
Exactly. I am happy. I opened my email folder, and there's actually something there from a real person that I've talked to before. It's a good day.
Yes. Yeah. So, all right.
The only thing I ask Heathen, if it's possible to block out my hideous image that was in there earlier, because I really look like hell.
Yeah, I mean it was pretty bad, but the only way I would be able to do that is if I downloaded this Hangout, went in, blurred it out, and then uploaded it again, because like when this ends, it'll go on to YouTube, you know, like
don't worry about it then.
I mean, but if it was a serious issue, I would remove this Hangout if it's an issue for you.
Oh no.
Okay.
No, it's not an issue for me. Okay. I was delighted to speak to all of you, and such a privilege, such an honor to be here with you guys.
Yeah, it was wonderful, and hopefully we can do it again next Saturday. And Willow, it was wonderful getting to know you and hanging out with you more, and also to Morgan, who was in here earlier, who's also Halal Agatha. Am I getting it right? Oh well, but Morgan, who joined us earlier, it was wonderful. So thank you all so much. And I do have a video that's going to be coming out on Monday, just like a little rant. So hope to see you all then.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Definitely.
All right.
Nice to meet you, Willow.
Nice to meet you guys too.
My husband's going to be thrilled. I was talking to a fellow Cajun.
Did you want to say goodbye, Animus? Because I'm going to end the Hangout.
Yeah. Good night, folks. Y'all have a good week. It was a blast to see you tonight.
All right. Good night, all. Take care.
All right.
Take care.